I wasn't supposed to come home for another 3 months. My deployment was ending, and I had planned to take leave somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't hold memories of childhood fights and family dinners where I always felt like the outsider looking in. But when my mother's voice cracked through the phone that Tuesday morning, telling me that Grandma Rose had passed away in her sleep, something twisted in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. To continue listening to this beautiful and special story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special greeting for you in an upcoming story. She went peacefully, Mom said, but there was something underneath her words, something she wasn't saying. Olivia's been handling everything. You know how she is with these things. Yes, I knew exactly how Olivia was with these things. My older sister had always been the one who stayed close to home, who visited Grandma every Sunday, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries while I was learning to march in formation and clean my rifle until it gleamed. Olivia was the favorite, the one who never left, the one who made everyone else feel guilty for choosing a different path. I hung up the phone and stared at my small quarters on base. Through the window I could see other soldiers going about their morning routines, but everything felt suddenly distant, like I was watching life through thick glass. Something was wrong. I couldn't name it, couldn't point to any specific thing my mother had said, but my gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive in places where trust meant survival, was screaming at me to get home. Now, the flight from North Carolina to Ohio felt endless. I kept replaying that phone call, dissecting every pause, every inflection in my mother's voice. When I finally landed in Columbus, the November air bit through my civilian jacket like a reminder that I didn't belong here anymore if I ever really had. Chapter 2. She arrived with words that burn. The funeral home smelled like too many flowers trying to mask something sadder underneath. I found my family clustered in the front row, my mother's face red and puffy, my father's arm around her shoulders in that careful way he had when he was trying to hold everyone together. And there was Olivia, wearing a black dress that somehow made her look both grieving and important, accepting condolences like she was the widow instead of just another granddaughter. She saw me before I reached them. Her eyes swept over my civilian clothes, jeans and a simple black sweater. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed military precision, and I watched her mouth tighten just slightly. The same expression she'd worn when we were kids and I'd forgotten to make my bed or left my toys scattered across our shared room. Catherine, she stood and embraced me, but it felt like hugging a mannequin. I wasn't sure you'd make it. Of course I made. Well, you know how it is with your schedule. She stepped back and adjusted her dress with the kind of practiced movement that told me she'd been receiving sympathy all day. I've been taking care of everything, the arrangements, the will reading, all of it. You don't need to worry about any of the details. There it was, that tone, the same one she'd used when we were teenagers and she'd taken over planning my birthday party, or when she'd answered phone calls meant for me and decided I was too busy to talk. The tone that said she knew better, had things under control, was the responsible one. I didn't realize there was a will reading already scheduled. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock sharp. Olivia glanced around the room, making sure people could see her being the dutiful granddaughter, the one who handled crisis with grace. Grandma was very specific about her wishes. She made sure everything was clear. Something cold settled in my stomach. The way she said it, like she was delivering news rather than sharing information, like she already knew what those wishes were. Chapter 3. I was there, but invisible. The next morning, I sat in the law office wearing my dress uniform. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe because I needed to feel like someone who belonged somewhere. Or maybe because I wanted Olivia to remember that I hadn't just been playing soldier for the past 8 years. This was who I had become. The lawyer, Miss Henderson, was older than I expected, with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly as he opened the manila folder containing Grandma Rosa's final wishes. My parents sat to my left, Olivia to my right, and I could feel the tension radiating from my sister like heat from a furnace. Rose Catherine Monroe, he began, and I startled at hearing Grandma's full name. I'd forgotten that we shared the middle name, that I'd been named after her. Left a very detailed will, updated as recently as last year. My mother reached for my father's hand. Olivia sat perfectly still, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait. To my daughter Margaret and her husband David, I leave my retirement savings, approximately $47,000, to be split equally between them. Mom started crying quietly. Dad squeezed her hand. To my granddaughter Olivia Marie, I leave my jewelry collection, including my engagement ring and pearl necklace, as well as my china set and family photographs. Olivia nodded once, like she was accepting an expected gift, like she'd known this was coming. And to my granddaughter, Catherine Rose, I leave my house at 41 Cove Maple Street, along with all furnishings not otherwise specified, my personal letters and documents and my late husband's military medals. The words hit the room like a physical blow. I felt my mother's sharp intake of breath, heard my father's quiet oh my, but what I noticed most was the absolute stillness from Olivia. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. She just sat there like a statue while my world shifted on its axis. Grandma had left me the house where I'd spent every summer until I turned 18, where I'd learned to bake cookies and plant tomatoes and believe that someone thought I was worth choosing. The house that, for the first time in my adult life, made me feel like I had a real home to come back to. There must be some mistake, Olivia said, her voice carefully controlled. Grandma always talked about me taking care of the house. She knew I'd stay local, that I'd preserve it properly. Mr. Henderson looked at her over his glasses. I'm afraid there's no mistake. Mrs. Monroe was very specific about her intentions. Chapter 4. The decision that pushed me away. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was with family. As we left the lawyer's office, Olivia grabbed my arm in the parking lot. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my jacket sleeve, and when I looked at her face, I saw something I'd never seen before. Desperation. You can't seriously want that house, she said. What are you going to do with it? You're never here. You'll just let it fall apart. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it. Catherine, be realistic. You're stationed in North Carolina. You could be deployed anywhere next. That house needs someone who can take care of it properly. She was right, of course. I knew she was right, but something stubborn and hurt inside me refused to admit it. For once in my life, Grandma had chosen me, the granddaughter who missed Christmas dinners and forgot to send birthday cards, who called irregularly and visited even less. For once I was the one someone had thought of first. Maybe I'll take early retirement, I said, just to see how she'd react. Don't be ridiculous. You can't throw away your career over a house. It's not just a house, Olivia. It's Grandma's house. And what am I supposed to do? I've been planning on that house for years. Everyone knew I'd inherit it. I've already been taking care of the maintenance, the utilities, everything. That stopped me. What do you mean you've been taking care of the utilities? She looked away, and I saw a flush creep up her neck. Someone had to. Grandma was getting forgetful toward the end. I made sure the bills got paid, that the yard work got done. I've been the one actually responsible for that place. Without asking her, she needed help, Catherine. You wouldn't know because you weren't here. There it was again. The guilt, served up like a familiar meal I'd been eating my whole life. You weren't here. You chose to leave. You can't come back now and pretend to care. But this time, instead of apologizing, instead of shrinking back and accepting that I was the bad granddaughter who didn't deserve nice things, I stood up straighter. 8 years in the military had taught me something about taking responsibility for my choices, and I had chosen to serve my country. That didn't make me a bad person. It didn't make me unworthy of love. I'll think about it, I told her, and walked away. Chapter 5. Coming back wasn't the plan, but I came back. 3 days later, I was supposed to be on a plane back to Fort Bragg. Instead, I was standing in Grandma Rose's kitchen, holding the key that Mr. Henderson had given me and trying to figure out why everything felt wrong. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Yellow gingham curtains in the kitchen, the same ceramic roosters on the windowsill, the same squeaky floorboard by the back door, but it was too clean, too organized, like someone had been living here and trying to erase any evidence of it. I opened the refrigerator and found it fully stocked. Fresh milk, eggs, vegetables that couldn't have been more than a few days old. In the bathroom, there were toiletries that definitely weren't Grandma's style, expensive face cream, a curling iron that looked brand new, contact solution. Olivia had been living here, not just taking care of the utilities or doing maintenance, actually living here, treating it like her own home while Grandma was still alive. I sat down heavily on the couch, the same floral couch where Grandma and I used to watch old movies and share bowls of popcorn, and tried to process what this meant. Had Grandma known? Had she been pushed out of her own home, little by little, until she was staying somewhere else? The will had mentioned that she'd updated it last year. What had prompted that? My phone rang. Olivia, have you made a decision about the house? I'm in it right now. Long pause. What do you mean? You're in it. I mean, I'm sitting in the living room, looking at your contact solution in the bathroom. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder. I was taking care of her, Catherine. She couldn't live alone anymore, but she was too proud to admit it. I was making sure she ate properly, that she took her medications, that she wasn't isolated. Where was she living? She had been staying with me and Tom more and more. It was easier for everyone. But she never moved out officially. No. But because this was still her home, the home she left to me. You're being unreasonable. Maybe I was, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something that mattered, something that was mine not because I'd earned it, or achieved it, or proven myself worthy, but because someone who loved me had wanted me to have it. I'm taking leave, I told her. Extended leave. I'm going to stay here for a while, and figure things out. The silence that followed was so long I thought she'd hung up. You'll regret this, she finally said. You don't know what you're doing. Maybe not, but I was going to find out. Chapter 6. Everything was the same. Except me. The first week alone, in Grandma's house, was strange in ways I hadn't expected. Every morning, I woke up in the same room, where I'd spent childhood summers, surrounded by the same flowered wallpaper and lace curtains, but I felt like a stranger visiting a museum of my own past. I started going through Grandma's things systematically, not because I wanted to change anything, but because I needed to understand what her life had really been like in those final years. In her bedroom closet, I found clothes that were clearly too big for her. Had she been losing weight? In the kitchen, I discovered pill organizers, with dates going back months, but they were filled with vitamins and supplements, not prescription medications. Either Grandma had been healthier than Olivia claimed, or someone had cleaned out anything that might tell a different story. It was in the basement, in an old trunk that I almost didn't bother opening, that I found the first real clue. The trunk was tucked behind the furnace, covered in dust thick enough to write in. Inside, underneath moth-eaten quilts and yellowed doilies, I found a shoebox wrapped in a plastic bag. The box was labeled in Grandma's careful handwriting. Important papers, Catherine. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, dating back 5 years, showing regular withdrawals of $500 every month, always on the first of the month, always the same amount. There were also copies of checks, made out to Olivia Monroe Peterson, with household expenses, written in the memo line. $500 a month, for 5 years, $30,000. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the money, it was the day. The withdrawals had continued right up until the month before Grandma died, and according to the timestamps on some of the statements, they'd been printed just 6 months ago. Grandma hadn't been confused or forgetful when it came to her finances. She'd been keeping track of everything. At the bottom of the box was a composition notebook, the kind we'd used in elementary school. The cover was worn soft from handling, and when I opened it, I found pages and pages of Grandma's handwriting, a journal. March 15th. Olivia says, I shouldn't be living alone anymore. She may be right, but I wish she'd asked instead of just deciding. Catherine called today from Fort Bragg. She sounded tired but happy. I didn't tell her about the living situation. I don't want her to worry. April 3rd. Moved more clothes to Olivia's house. She says it's temporary, but she's already talking about redecorating my bedroom. I miss my garden. June 22nd. Catherine's birthday. Sent her a card, but didn't mention that I'm not really living at home anymore. Olivia says she's too busy with her military career to deal with family drama. Maybe she's right. Maybe it's better this way. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by dust and memories, reading entry after entry about how my grandmother had been slowly, carefully displaced from her own life. Not through malice, exactly, but through a kind of suffocating care that left no room for her own choices. And through it all, she'd been protecting me from knowing about it. Chapter 7. The silence revealed what was missing. The journal entries painted a picture I wished I'd never seen. Grandma hadn't been declining mentally. She'd been disappearing socially. Olivia had gradually taken over every aspect of her life, from grocery shopping to doctor's appointments to deciding which friends she should see and how often. August 10th. Tried to drive to Betty's house today, but Olivia had Tom take my car keys. She says my reflexes aren't what they used to be. I'm 79, not 99, but maybe she's right. Maybe I am becoming a burden. September 3rd. Catherine was supposed to call today, but Olivia answered my phone. She told Catherine I was napping and would call back later. I never got the message until the next day. When I mentioned it, Olivia said she was just trying to let me rest. I'm starting to feel like a stranger in my own life. October 18th. Olivia keeps talking about how the house is too much for me to maintain. She's probably right. But I love my house. I love my garden and my kitchen and the way the morning light comes through the bedroom window. I don't want to love these things less just because I'm getting older. But it was the entry from December that broke my heart completely. December 20th, Catherine won't be home for Christmas again. Olivia says it's because she doesn't really care about family, that her military friends are more important to her than we are. But I remember Catherine as a little girl, how she used to help me bake cookies and how she'd sit on the porch with me counting stars. I don't think people change that much. I think maybe she just doesn't know how much we miss her. I think maybe we haven't been very good at telling her. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, crying for the first time since I'd gotten the news about Grandma's death. Not just crying for losing her, but crying for all the conversations we'd never had. All the ways I'd let Olivia's version of events become the only version that mattered. When I finally stopped crying, I knew what I had to do, but I also knew I needed help to do it right. I called Mr. Henderson. I need to ask you about the timeline of my grandmother's will. I said, when exactly was it last updated? There was a rustling of papers. Let me see, it was revised on January 15th of last year. She came in alone, very determined about what she wanted to change. What did she change? Well, I probably shouldn't discuss the details, but given that you're mentioned in the will, originally, the house was to be split between you and your sister. She changed it to leave the house entirely to you. My knees went weak. Do you know why? She said she'd realized that some people take care of things by holding on too tightly, and others take care of things by making sure they have room to grow. She said you were the kind of person who would love the house without trying to control it. After I hung up, I sat in Grandma's kitchen as the sun set outside the window, watching the light fade across the same linoleum floor where I'd learned to bake bread and snap green beans and believe that I was worth someone's patience. Olivia had been taking care of Grandma, in her way, but she'd also been slowly erasing her, decision by decision, until Grandma felt like a guest in her own life, and Grandma had seen it happening, had understood it, had made sure that at least one thing, this house, this home, would be safe from that kind of suffocating love. Chapter 8. She thought no one would remember. I spent the next 2 days reading every journal entry, every bank statement, every piece of paper in that box. I was building a case, not for court, but for my own understanding of what had really happened in this house. What I found was a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. Olivia hadn't just been managing Grandma's care, she'd been managing her entire existence. The journal entries detailed doctor's appointments that Grandma hadn't wanted to schedule, medications she'd been talked into taking, social visits that had been cancelled on her behalf, and always the underlying message, this is for your own good. March 30th. Olivia says I shouldn't drive anymore. I had a small fender bender last week, just bumped Mrs. Patterson's mailbox while backing out, but nothing serious. Olivia acted like I'd caused a multi-car pileup. She's probably right to be concerned, but I feel like I'm disappearing piece by piece. May 12th tried to tell Olivia that I want to keep living in my own house, even if I need some help. She got that look on her face, the one she used to get as a child when she thought I was being unreasonable. She said we'd talk about it later, but later never comes. July 4th, Independence Day. The irony isn't lost on me, but it was a loose piece of paper, tucked between the journal pages, that made me understand how deliberate this had all been. It was a handwritten note, apparently drafted for a phone conversation, in Olivia's handwriting. Tell Catherine that Mom is doing fine, but gets confused when she's overstimulated. Keep conversations short. Don't mention the living situation. It will just upset her, and there's nothing she can do about it from so far away anyway. Instructions for managing me, the way she'd been managing Grandma. I sat there holding that piece of paper, remembering all the phone calls over the past 2 years that had felt rushed. All the times Olivia had answered Grandma's phone and said she was resting. All the ways I'd been gradually convinced that my presence in Grandma's life was more burden than blessing. My phone rang. Olivia again. Catherine, you need to be reasonable about this house situation. Tom and I have been talking, and we're prepared to make you an offer. An offer. We'll buy your share of the house for fair market value. That way you get the money you need for your future, and the house stays in the family with people who can actually take care of it. My share. Olivia, the will was very clear. The house is mine. Well, yes, Technically, but you know what I mean. We've put so much work into it already. So much time and money. It's really more ours than yours at this point. I closed my eyes and tried to count to 10 the way we'd been taught in anger management training. I made it to Are you talking about the $30,000 you took from Grandma's account over the past 5 years? Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I don't know what you mean. $500 a month, Olivia, for 5 years. I have the bank statements. That was for household expenses, for taking care of her. While you were also preventing her from living in her own house. I was protecting her. From what? From being independent? From making her own choices? You don't understand. You weren't here. You don't know how hard it was, how much responsibility. You're right, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I wasn't here, but I'm here now. I hung up and immediately called Mr. Henderson again. I need to ask you about something. Is there any legal recourse if someone has been financially exploiting an elderly person? That would depend on the specific circumstances. Can you be more detailed about what you suspect? I told him about the bank statements, about the journal entries, about the pattern of control and isolation I'd discovered. When I finished, there was a long pause. Miss Monroe, he said finally, I think you need to bring those documents to my office tomorrow morning, and I think you might want to consider filing a complaint with Adult Protective Services, even though she's gone now. Especially because she's gone. If your sister has been systematically exploiting your grandmother, there may be others at risk, and there may be legal remedies available to recover some of those funds. After I hung up, I sat in Grandma's living room and tried to imagine how this was going to play out. I thought about family dinners that would never be the same, about holidays that would be battlegrounds, about the way this would divide not just me and Olivia, but everyone who loved us both. But then I thought about Grandma, alone in someone else's house, writing in her journal about feeling like she was disappearing piece by piece. And I knew that some things were more important than keeping the peace. Chapter 9. A letter, a sentence, a period. The next morning, I was in Miss Henderson's office by 9 o'clock, carrying the shoebox of documents like evidence to a crime scene. He looked through everything methodically, making notes and occasionally shaking his head. This is quite troubling, he said finally. Your grandmother was clearly being financially exploited, and possibly emotionally abused as well. The isolation tactics your sister used are textbook elder abuse. What can we do about it? Well, there are several options. You could file a complaint with Adult Protective Services, as I mentioned. You could also pursue civil remedies. Essentially sue your sister for the money she took. And depending on what else we discover, there might even be criminal charges that could be filed. The weight of that settled on me slowly. Criminal charges. Against my sister. It felt both impossible and inevitable. However, Mr. Henderson continued, there's something else you should know. Something I probably should have mentioned yesterday. He pulled out another file. This one thicker than the first. Your grandmother came to see me 3 more times after she updated her will. The last time was just 2 months before she died. She was concerned about some things she'd discovered. He handed me a manila envelope, sealed and marked with my name in Grandma's handwriting. She asked me to give this to you specifically, and only if you ever came looking for answers about her final years. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in Grandma's careful script, dated just 8 weeks before her death. My dearest Catherine, it began, if you're reading this, it means you've discovered what I've been too ashamed to tell you while I was alive. It means you've found out about the money, about how I've been living, about all the ways I let myself disappear rather than fight for what was mine. I had to stop reading and wipe my eyes before I could continue. I want you to know that I don't blame Olivia. Not entire. She loves me in her way, and she genuinely believes she was protecting me, but she loves me the way you might love a fragile doll. Something to be kept safe and controlled. Never something to be trusted with its own choices. You love differently, Catherine. You love by letting people be who they are, even when it's inconvenient for you, even when it means they make choices you don't understand. When you joined the military, I was scared for you and proud of you in equal measure, but I never once thought you were wrong to follow your own path. I'm leaving you the house not just because I want you to have it, but because I trust you to understand what a home really means. It's not a place to be preserved like a museum. It's not a possession to be managed and controlled. It's a place where people can grow and change, and become who they're meant to be. I hope you'll forgive me for not being braver while I was alive. I hope you'll understand that sometimes love looks like standing up to the people who claim to know what's best for you. And I hope you'll know that every day I spent away from my own home, I was thinking about you and hoping you'd come back someday to claim what was always meant to be yours. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. Check behind the loose board in the basement wall, near the water heater. There's something there I've been saving for you. I looked up at Mr. Henderson through tears I didn't bother trying to hide. She knew, I said. She knew everything that was happening, and she was documenting it. Your grandmother was a very intelligent woman, Miss Monroe, and she clearly understood that you might need evidence someday. We went back to the house together. In the basement, behind a board that looked secure but wiggled when I touched it, I found another box. This one contained photocopies of every check Olivia had written to herself, every forged signature on documents Grandma had never seen, every piece of mail that had been redirected without her permission. But at the bottom of the box was something else, a letter addressed to Olivia, sealed but never sent. Olivia, it read, I've been trying to find the words to tell you that I need my life back, not because you haven't taken good care of me, but because being taken care of isn't the same as being allowed to live. I know you mean well, but meaning well isn't enough when it comes to erasing someone else's autonomy. I need you to step back and let me make my own choices, even if they're not the choices you would make for me, especially then. Love, Mom. I showed the letter to Mr. Henderson. She tried, I said. She tried to set boundaries, but she couldn't bring herself to send it. Your grandmother was from a generation that didn't always know how to advocate for themselves, especially with family members, but she was smart enough to leave you the tools to advocate for her. That afternoon, I called Olivia one more time. We need to talk, I said, in person. Can you come to the house? Catherine, if this is about the money, it's about a lot more than the money, but yes, it's about that too. Chapter 10. The Choice I Made with a Peaceful Heart. Olivia arrived an hour later, and I could see the anxiety written across her face the moment she walked through the door. She looked around the living room like she was seeing it for the first time, taking in the boxes of documents I'd organized on the coffee table, the journal lying open to one of the more damning entries. What is all this? It's the truth, I said simply. It's what really happened here during the last 5 years of Grandma's life. I watched her face as I walked her through everything I'd found, the journal entries about feeling like a stranger in her own life, the bank statements showing the systematic withdrawal of money, the forged signatures on documents, the letter Grandma had written but never sent. You isolated her, I said when I'd finished laying out all the evidence. You convinced her that she was too frail to make her own decisions. And then you made all her decisions for her. You convinced her that I didn't really care about her. And then you used that as justification for keeping us apart. Olivia sat very still through all of this, her hands folded in her lap the same way they'd been at the will reading. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. You don't understand, she finally said. You weren't here. You didn't see how confused she was getting, how dangerous it was for her to live alone. Someone had to make the hard decisions. She wasn't confused, Olivia. I've read her journal. Her handwriting was steady right up until the end. Her thoughts were clear. The only thing she was confused about was why everyone suddenly thought she was incompetent to run her own life. She could have fallen. She could have forgotten to turn off the stove. She could have lived her life on her own terms until the day she died. That was her right. Olivia's composure finally cracked. You think it was easy? You think I wanted to spend 5 years managing every aspect of another person's life? I had my own life, Catherine. I had my own plans. But someone had to step up. Someone had to be responsible. No one asked you to be responsible for her entire existence. She asked you to help her, and you decided that meant taking over. And what would you have done? What would you have done from North Carolina? From your important military career? I had been dreading this question, because I knew she was partly right. I hadn't been here. I hadn't seen the gradual changes or been available for the daily decisions. But I also knew that my absence didn't justify what she'd done. I would have talked to her, I said. I would have asked her what she wanted instead of deciding what she needed. I would have found ways to help her stay independent instead of reasons why she couldn't. That's easy to say now. You're right. It is easy to say now. But you know what else is easy to say now? That you took $30,000 from a woman who trusted you. that you forged her signature on legal documents, that you systematically cut her off from the people she loved and convinced her it was for her own good. Olivia's face went white. I never meant for any of that to happen, but it did happen, and now I have to decide what to do about it. I pulled out the business card Mr. Henderson had given me for Adult Protective Services and placed it on the coffee table between us. I could file charges, I said. Financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, maybe fraud. The evidence is all here. Olivia stared at the card like it was a weapon pointed at her. But I continued, I'm not going to do that, not because you don't deserve it, but because Grandma wouldn't want me to destroy our family over this. Relief flooded her face, but I held up a hand. However, you are going to pay back every penny you took from her, with interest. And you're going to do it within 6 months. Catherine, I don't have that kind of money just sitting around. Then you'll figure it out. Sell something, take out a loan. Ask Tom's family for help. I don't care how you do it, but you'll do it. And if I don't, I picked up the business card and held it between 2 fingers. Then I'll file this complaint. And you can explain to Adult Protective Services and the police and a judge why you thought it was acceptable to steal from your own grandmother. We stared at each other across the coffee table, across years of competition and resentment and misunderstanding. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. There's one more thing, I said. I want you to write a letter to Grandma. An apology. Not for me, but for you. Because I think you need to understand what you took from her. And I don't think you can understand that until you try to put it into words. She's dead, Catherine. What's the point? The point is that you convinced a woman who raised 2 children, and buried a husband and lived through the Depression, that she was too incompetent to choose what to have for breakfast. The point is that you took away her dignity one decision at a time, and told yourself it was. Olivia started crying then. Not the careful tears of someone who wanted sympathy, but the ugly broken sobs of someone who finally understood the weight of what they'd done. I thought I was protecting her, she whispered. I thought if something happened to her while she was alone, it would be my fault. I thought you'd blame me for not doing enough. So instead, you did too much. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I never meant to hurt her. I never meant to make her feel like she was disappearing. But you did, and now she's gone. And she died feeling like she had to hide her own life from the people who were supposed to love her. We sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the evidence of a love that had gone terribly wrong. Finally, Olivia spoke again. What happens now? With us, I mean. I looked around Grandma's living room, at the afternoon light streaming through windows that had watched 3 generations of our family grow up and make mistakes and try to figure out how to love each other without causing harm. I don't know, I said honestly. I think that's up to you. I think it depends on whether you can understand that taking care of someone isn't the same as controlling them, and whether you can live with the fact that I'm not going to pretend this never happened. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the journal that lay open between us. Can I read it? She asked finally. Her journal. I mean, can I read what she really thought about everything? I hesitated. Some of the entries were harsh, particularly the ones about feeling abandoned by her own family. But maybe Olivia needed to read them. Maybe we both did. Yes, I said. But you read it here with me. And when you're done, you help me decide what to do with all of them. She nodded, reaching for the composition notebook with shaking hands. Over the next 2 hours, I watched my sister's face change as she read our grandmother's words. I saw her flinch when she got to the entries about feeling like a burden. I saw her close her eyes when she read about the loneliness, about missing her garden, and her independence and her sense of self. And I saw her break completely when she got to the entry about Christmas, about how Grandma had suspected that I still cared but didn't know how to show it. When she finished reading, she sat with the journal closed in her lap for a long time. She was so lonely. Olivia said finally, she was so lonely. And I made it worse. You were trying to help. No, I wasn't. Not really. I was trying to be I was trying to be the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home and did the right thing. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I was trying to be better than you. It was the most honest thing she'd said all day. And instead, you became someone Grandma was afraid of, I said not unkindly. Yeah, I did. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden that Grandma had loved and missed so much during those years when she wasn't allowed to tend it. "I'll pay the money back," she said without turning around. "All of it. And I'll write the letter." "But Catherine?" "Yeah, I need you to know that I didn't do this because I'm a bad person. I did it because I'm a scared person. I've been scared my whole life that I'm not good enough, not important enough, not needed enough. And when Grandma started getting older, I saw a chance to finally be indispensable to someone." She turned back to face me. "That doesn't excuse what I did, but I need you to understand that it wasn't malicious. It was just broken." I studied my sister's face, seeing not the competent, controlling woman who had managed Grandma's life, but the insecure little girl who had always been afraid of being left behind. "We're all broken, Olivia. The difference is whether we let our brokenness hurt other people." She nodded, accepting the judgment without argument. "What will you do now, with the house, I mean?" I looked around the room where I'd learned to play checkers and read Nancy Drew books and believe that I was worth someone's undivided attention. "I'm going to live in it. I'm going to take early retirement from the army, and live in Grandma's house and tend her garden, and try to understand what it means to have a home." "Really? Really? I've spent 8 years learning how to be a soldier. Maybe it's time to learn how to be a granddaughter. A good one this time." Olivia smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. A small, sad smile that reminded me of the sister I'd known before everything got complicated by competition and resentment. "She would have loved that," she said. "She always said you had the gentlest hands when it came to growing things." "Yeah. Well, maybe it's time to find out if that's still true." 3 months later, I was kneeling in Grandma's garden, planting tomatoes in the same spot where she'd taught me to tell the difference between a weed and a flower. The early retirement paperwork had gone through faster than expected, and I'd spent the winter learning how to be a civilian again, how to wake up without reveille and make decisions without orders from above. Olivia had been true to her word. The money was back in an account I'd set up in Grandma's name, which I'd then donated to a local organization that helped elderly people maintain their independence. She'd also written the letter, 3 pages of apology and understanding that I'd read once and then buried in Grandma's garden, next to the rosebush that bloomed every spring in defiance of the long winter. We talked occasionally now, carefully, like people walking across ice that might not hold their weight. But we talked. And sometimes, when she mentioned something about Tom or the kids or her job, I could hear echoes of the sister I'd grown up with, the one who used to build blanket forts with me and share secrets after our parents thought we were asleep. As I patted soil around a small tomato plant, I thought about Grandma's letter, about her hope that I would understand what a home really meant. I thought I was beginning to understand that it wasn't about the building, or the furniture, or even the memories held within the walls. Home was about having a place where you could grow and change, and make mistakes without disappearing. It was about being loved, not in spite of your choices, but because of your right to make them. I wiped dirt from my hands and stood up, looking at the neat rows of plants that would feed me through the summer and into the fall. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed with a text message, a photo from my army friend Jessica, showing her new apartment in Colorado. "Wish you were here," she'd written, "but I hope you're happy where you are." I looked around the garden, at the house that had chosen me as much as I'd chosen it, at the life I was slowly learning how to build from scratch. I typed back. "I really am." Inside the house, I could swear I heard the sound of someone humming in the kitchen, the same wordless tune Grandma used to sing while she baked cookies on Sunday afternoon. But when I went to investigate, I found only afternoon sunlight streaming through yellow gingham curtains and the lingering scent of the jasmine that bloomed just outside the window. I smiled and started humming along. Some battles, I'd learned, are won not by fighting, but by simply refusing to disappear. And some victories look like nothing more than a woman in her grandmother's kitchen, finally understanding that she has every right to take up space in the world. I opened the recipe box that had been waiting for me on the counter, and pulled out the card for Grandma's chocolate chip cookies. It was time to fill this house with the smell of home again. And maybe, if I was very lucky, it was time to learn that coming home doesn't always mean going backward. Sometimes it means discovering that the place you've been looking for your whole life has been waiting patiently for you to find the courage to claim it.